This week on To the Contrary.
First, capping benefits for unwed mothers. Then, feminist infighting on social media. Behind the headlines, for Black History Month, the legacy and future of black women's colleges.
Welcome to the Contrary, a discussion of news and social trends from diverse perspectives. Up first, babies and benefits.
Enough's enough. That's the message Tea Party darling Senator Rand Paul is sending unwed mothers having multiple children. He wants to cap government benefits for mothers after they've had what he calls, quote, a certain amount of kids. Caps already exist in 16 states. Another 7 states dropped caps after they did not produce the desired result of persuading unwed women to have fewer children, and instead, according to critics, led women deeper into poverty and poor health.
So, Sabrina Schaeffer, why didn't those caps work?
I think caps are an arbitrary number, and what we really want to do is figure out how to raise women out of poverty so that we don't have to have this conversation.
Right, it's too close to caps on babies for my money. But it didn't work because it was a problem in search of a solution. Poor women had long had birth rates that match middle-class women.
It depends on what your definition of success is. If you're defining success as them having less kids, no, it didn't work. But if you're defining success as the government spending less money, then that did work.
I don't think we're focusing on the right issue here. This is a larger question, an issue about access to reproductive health care, birth control, and family planning, which, of course, as we know, sadly, doesn't always go hand in hand with poor women.
All right, so you say if we were to just beef up access to reproductive health care and education, about, access to the birth control, access to knowledge about how it works, that this problem would go away?
I think it would make a much better solution than trying to punish these women. And we're not talking, we're the men in this picture. We're acting like these women are just sitting there reproducing on their own, and this is what they want.
Well, this is an offhanded comment from Ron Paul. That ought to be enough to discard. Look, there is no problem.
Exactly.
There is no problem. There's not even a problem with health care, contraception, and abortion, because poor women get access to it now, even before the Affordable Health Care Act. There is no problem. There is a problem with poor children being born and an increasing number being born, which affects everything else in their life.
I don't think that you can deny that reproductive health and rights are under attack in this country, especially.
Well, that doesn't have to do with
I think Eleanor is right that we're very often afraid to have an honest conversation about what we're looking at. Unfortunately, there are a lot of women who are raising children, not just one child, but multiple children on their own. It is almost impossible to raise yourself out of poverty if that is the situation. And I don't want to be moralizing. I don't want to pass judgment on these women. I want to just recognize that this is the hard choice, right? And we want to figure out how to make your life easier. And I think that there are a number of things we can do. We want to expand the school choice policies for these women so that they can make sure that these children have safe and learning environments. We want to make sure that they have access to health care. We want to make sure that they have.
Do you think expanding school choice really has anything to do with an unwed teenage mother's decision whether to keep a pregnancy?
Yes, because if her mother had the choice to put her into a better environment from the start, we're going to see that fewer women are going to end up in poverty, right? What are the 3 things that make people fall into poverty? Not finishing high school, not getting married, and doing drugs. It's simple.
I do actually agree with you with regards to that, but I wanted to get back to the real problem here, which is that the government doesn't have the money, though, to pay out if someone has 5, 6 kids, to say, I'm going to continue to give you more and more money for the kids. And then that is a real part of this problem here, because the government, money doesn't grow on trees.
But if it's true, and let's accept for the moment that the government figures are right, that women on TANF, formerly welfare, aren't having any more kids than other women, which is to say the average fertility rate in this country is about 2, then why are you going to cap it at 1? What would you cap it at?
So to me, it's not about capping it at the number of children. It's just the number, capping it at a certain amount period that a family of any size can get from the government on welfare.
You know, the
for a
caps
certain
are
amount of
going
time.
away. You know, there were 23 states, now there are 16 states. So even the conservative states that had them, and by the way, I guess in the beginning half the states had them, are seeing that they're not effective.
And 7 are already dropping them. I feel like Rand Paul almost took this as an opportunity to try to promote the institution of marriage, which he thinks is going to solve all of this. And I think even he found himself stumbling into maybe it's about concept.
I mean, it's pretty obvious he didn't realize that states had already tried it.
I don't think he realized he didn't know what he was talking about.
But I don't think we should undermine the role that marriage would help in terms of playing this. I mean, marriage is a stabilizing force, right? It encourages a natural safety net, right? It provides for a community. It means that you have 2 incomes very often. So there's something good. And I know people are wary of saying that marriage is a good thing because it makes them think that they are somehow a social conservative. But I think, look, all of us around this table would agree that marriage is
I'm a liberal and marriage is a good thing.
Right.
But I think the way liberals and conservatives could get together, and this is an issue that needs to be discussed openly. It's not poor women have more children, whether we have poor women, shucks, black women have an abortion rate 4 times the rate of white women. Well, I think we need to focus on young women deciding to have a child out of wedlock. Why? You have to ask yourself, why?
Yes.
And I don't think that is
because it's fashionable and because other friends are doing it.
Then we got to.
It's because Forever 21 now has a maternity line. What exactly? Let's have a show on this, Bonnie.
And that's I think we have to be careful. I don't want to be judgmental towards those women because that's the last thing they need. But I also think we don't need to put these women on a pedestal as if something we all want to aspire to, right? We need to have an honest conversation that this is actually a hard choice.
Well, and you know, last week we discussed about the fact that that show 16 and Pregnant has turned off thousands of young women from getting into that situation. On the other hand, there's a religious right movie out now that glamorizes unwed motherhood, about a 16-year-old who gets pregnant and goes to a church-funded settlement to have the child. So there are all these sort of waxing and waning cultural institutions. But I do want to get back to, because you talked about the sort of brushed aside the cost of these, the cost issue. There is a cost issue when you're providing food stamps, TANF, housing subsidies. When
the cost is to your life as a woman, it's gone if you decide at 17 to have a child and you're not married.
But isn't there something to be said for then government should not fund subsidies to women who make these choices?
We would not want to keep a child from being raised with the proper nutrition and the proper access to health care and to education.
Doesn't that though on some level signal what you do will be rewarded
No, it doesn't, because they don't have any more children. You know what the problem, you have said so, that we have in this country is 0 birth rate. If it were not for our immigrants, we wouldn't have any birth rate at all. This is not a problem.
2.1%.
Yeah.
U.S. fertility is replacement level. Yeah. It's not growth level.
It's not a problem in this country. The problem is who is having children, often among the poor, often among people of color, are people who are having them too early and by themselves.
And also, just to add to that, is that the problem with the spending is, look, the food stamp program has exploded, and largely there's a massive amount of fraud, right? If we got rid of all the fraud, we could afford these young children. So I don't think anyone around the table would advocate, putting a cap on spending for that.
All right, let us know what you think. Please follow me on Twitter at Bonnie Urbay or at To the Contrary. From families to feminist wars.
Is the internet good or bad for feminism? The question arose this week on a variety of women's issues websites, such as redlightpolitics.com, on Twitter, and in a Nation magazine article by Michelle Goldberg. Her article details a long list of e-volleys and counter-volleys among feminists, calling out other feminists for a variety of faults, some calling each other self-righteous, others criticizing each other's knowledge of or commitment to the movement. and even the coining of a new term, misogyno-feminists, which means women whose primary form of feminist activism is trashing other women. To be fair, intra-movement warfare is hardly new. Early Christians had starkly different views of the meaning of Jesus' pronouncements, as one example. But the Internet reignited the feminist movement that seemed to have lost its course after intense activism in the 60s and 70s.
Been a huge revival and efflorescence of feminist discussion and feminist activism. It was the online outcry that led the Susan B. Komen Foundation to back off from its decision to defund Planned Parenthood. It was the Internet that I think helped make a global star out of Wendy Davis and focused international attention on her heroic 14-hour filibuster.
Now activists are describing it as downright hostile towards feminist organizers.
You know, one of the rules is that you kind of can never question the anger of a person who's more oppressed than you. You know, if you break the rules, kind of all bets are off, and there's basically no limit to the amount of vitriol that you can be fairly subjected to. What it really does is lead people to disengage.
So, Francesca, is this a story, or is it just normal, happens with every movement, except every movement, you know, at least until 15 years ago, didn't have the kind of exposure that the Internet gives to this infighting?
That's exactly what it is. The Internet has just amplified the inter-party, the inter-movement fighting. I wish I could say that the conservative movement didn't have this problem, but you don't even want to know the stupid things that the conservative movement argues about. So, yeah, that's exactly what this is about. This is just a silly story.
Yeah, you know, I don't know under what rock you had to go to find this.
We go under rocks all the time. We like rocks.
I tell you, as a black woman who was is a feminist when there were very few black women, I have to tell you that I have never felt patronized in the movement. But when I read from the readings we had about some of the condescending things that these white women are saying they are doing in order for the benefit of black women, that's why I say under what rock. I don't. And if what we're trying to do, and feminists, after all, like every group, is really trying to draw larger group of people into your point of view. Right. If this is how you're presenting yourself to the great unwashed American woman, forget about feminism.
Yeah, but wait a minute. But we all know that the Internet is just the revivification of the Wild West. So in the sense that maybe in the 60s and 70s, pre-Internet, when all there were magazines like Ms. Magazines, you know, not rapid-fire responses to each other, and censorship, obviously. I mean, not everybody could get her beliefs into Time magazine or Ms. magazine at the time. So now the Internet lets everybody talk, every brilliant person and every nutcase, quite frankly.
Everybody has a platform.
And now the nutcases have apparently, at least that section of the blog, have stolen. But let me say, there was a very rigorous discussion about whether feminism was too white when it started, and it was a good frontal back and forth discussion, and in the end black women identified themselves as feminists. Black men in the Black Caucus were the first to vote for every single woman's issue whenever it came up. So it disappeared, but in part because of the reason you said. You didn't have the rapid-fire nuts and everybody are in this together.
But I think but I do want to ask, has it done anything to to bring back that old saw of, the ain't I a woman issue?
That is so off mainstream that I had never heard of it before I did these
But what's interesting is that at the same time as this story sort of came about, there has been quite a bit of infighting among women's groups and sort of feminists on the right. There is a real divide between sort of what many, at the Independent Women's Forum, we would call ourselves equity feminists, versus many of the libertarians, right? And they would identify much more closely with sort of what we think of as traditional gender feminists. And I think it's interesting that all of this is sort of happening at the same time, and it suggests that there's some real questions to be answered as what is feminism.
But okay, good. Now, what's the difference between equity and traditional feminists?
Right. Well, I think that equity feminists believe that we are equal to men, but we are very cognizant of gender differences and gender preferences and aptitudes and strengths. And I think where traditional feminism sees that women and men really have fewer and fewer differences, right? And that we should to be equal is to have parity and to have, you know, same number of women CEOs as men. And
okay, but how does I guess I'm more curious on the conservative side.
Yeah.
How do those fights play out, and what does it do?
The same way, and it actually has created quite a bit of hostility. There's sort of a lot of targeting. This term slut shaming is thrown around all over the place on the right now, and rape culture is a big one among libertarian feminists, if you want to call them that. And this notion that somehow if you are someone, for instance, at IWF, that we believe in blaming a rape victim. This is crazy.
My issue with this article was that it makes the feminist movement, both domestic, national and international, seem like a bunch of mean girls fighting in the hallway of a high school. There's going to be problems everywhere with men in their organizations. Yes, there's infighting, hello, everywhere. But I feel like the larger issue of what online feminism has done, not only to kind of revitalize the movement here at home, but globally and around the world. Let's not forget the Arab Spring. I mean, I owe so much to the online feminists.
The so-called war on women?
The war on women, exactly. And also, I mean, the State Department actually created an entire arm of digital diplomacy based on how women and young people were able to reach out to basically the whole world during the Iranian uprising.
That's a quick question. Should Michelle Goldberg, who I'm sure is, I don't know if she calls herself a feminist, but certainly she writes for progressive online publication, should she not have written the article?
I think, you know, she probably had a deadline, and I admire her work for the most part, but I think sometimes writers feel like they're under of a deadline, and I feel like, no offense, but maybe if you want to take a little bit, she was under a deadline, because what was this article about?
The war on women, though, I think is a bad example, though, of what this online infighting has done, because the war on women, even if you believe that the GOP has a problem with women, hates women, whatever else, Eleanor's nodding her head.
Wait a minute, even the RNC is training men how to talk to women, so they recognize the GOP does have a problem.
I think that men of all parties need to learn how to speak to women better about women's issues. That's not just
being so condescending to women.
We're about out of time.
That's not just the GOP, but what I am saying is that the so-called war on women that the GOP has been blown out of proportion because of the internet.
All right.